Peter smiled while he unrolled the black fishnet stockings up his freshly shaven legs. His manhood strained against the gaff, holding it snugly between his cheeks while he attached the stockings to his garters. Standing up, Peter bit the tip of his right thumb lightly as he looked at the outfit hanging behind his door that he was going to be wearing around his employees that evening. While Peter was aware the outfit was over the top, he knew that if he ever could get away with wearing it, it would be on Halloween. Peter reached for the red and blue corset top and placed it around his body. He gave an approving nod to the effect the corset had on the breast forms he had glued to his chest moments before as he began to lace it up. Although it had been years since he put on a corset, Peter found that the various tricks to lacing it came back quickly to him. Once his fingers moved away from the laces, they descended down along the gold braid trim that lined and decorated the corset before coming to a rest on the gold frog closures just below the bust of the corset. Peter exhaled as deeply as his corset-constricted sides would allow. He kept his hands on his sides while he moved towards a mirror. He took hold of his makeup as he stared at the lines between the seams of his breast forms and his chest. Peter applied the makeup to the seams, careful to not get any of it on the black trim that lined the corset's heart-shaped neckline. After turning away from the mirror and putting down the makeup, Peter took hold of a black PVC miniskirt and stepped into it. As Peter secured it over his waist, he sensed how restricting it was going to be on his gait. Peter smiled as he felt the skirt forcing him to take small mincing steps while he sauntered towards the black bolero jacket that went with his outfit with a well-practiced wiggle in his steps. Peter slipped his arms through the short sleeves of the jacket. He pulled it over his shoulders, letting the soft faux black fur that covered the bolero jacket brush against his false bust, neck and shoulders. The soft feeling aroused Peter before he looked down at the floor for the black Mary Jane heels with a 1-inch platform and a 4-inch heel that had been selected for him to pair with the outfit. As he finished buckling the straps on the heels, he heard a knock on his door. "Mr. Baker, are you decent?" "Never," Peter answered with a smirk. The feminine voice on the other side of the door laughed before it replied, "Okay, can you make yourself decent and come on down to the stage? Jacques wants to go over something with you." "No problem," Peter responded while he moved towards his mirror and removed his lipstick from the purse he had carried into his office in the same discreet bag that he had used to conceal the rest of his outfit. Once Peter finished applying his makeup, he placed on his bald cap and reached for his blonde wig. As he began to secure it to his head, he heard another knock on his door. "Peter," he heard his company's wardrobe director say. "Yes, Emily. Are you almost ready?" Peter smiled and said, "Are you alone?" Emily looked around before she answered, "Yes." Peter moved towards the door and stepped aside as he unlocked it to let her into his office. Emily entered the room with her hand over her mouth, unsure of what to expect. As Peter closed the door behind her, Emily kept her hands over her mouth until she said through a grin, "You look a lot better than I thought you would in that. I told you I have experience. You told me you did a few transvestite performances as supporting characters. I figured you were playing the ugly stepsister or that sort of thing. I played those too. You certainly don't look that, now, though," Emily replied with a laugh. "I think I have you to thank for that." "How so?" "You picked out the outfit for me." "I may have picked it out, and it's a great outfit, but, like everything else, it's all about how you wear it." "Do I wear it well?" Peter asked as he put his hands on his hips and held his head up high. "You wear it well. Madame Onassis ain't got nothing on you, babe," Emily answered with a smile. "That's because she's 6 feet under," Peter deadpanned while he returned to securing his wig. "Let me get that for you," Emily said. Peter nodded as he bowed his head a little to let Emily secure his wig in place with bobby pins. After feeling her fiddle on the top of his head for a few moments, Peter saw Emily smile as she said, "All done." Peter lifted his head up and turned back towards his mirror. He looked at Emily and said, "Do you think that I'll make Claire eat her words?" "What did she say again?" "You don't remember?" "Humor me, mademoiselle," Emily retorted with a grin. I noted that she stumbled a bit in her heels, and she said that I should try wearing them if I thought it was so easy. I think she'll be surprised by how easily you glide in them. I know I am. I told you. I played a lot of drag roles in comedies over the years, my dear. I'm assuming you were a volunteer, Emily replied with a smirk while Peter secured the outfit's matching black top hat, which was partially decorated with gold sequin braiding, to his wig. Peter blushed at her comment, knowing that his ease in the outfit and admissions had clearly let Emily know that his cross-dressing was not limited to his younger days on stage. Emily shook her head with a smile at his silence before she added, "The black feathers and the big, floppy red bow on the hat really sells your whole look to me." Peter nodded in silence while his eyes drifted back towards his reflection in the mirror. Emily watched him as he admired his reflection in silence for a few seconds before she exclaimed, "Will you stop by humping yourself already? We both have jobs to do." Peter was startled by her exclamation, but was amused by it as well as he picked up his black, leather whip and said, "Watch it." "I'll watch it, when you get on stage." "After you." "Oh, no, ladies first," Emily countered. "How does that still not let you out the door first?" Peter asked. "I'm a tramp, not a lady, missy," Emily retorted. No comment, Peter replied with a smile while he stepped out of his office door. Emily followed him out, and they made their way towards Jacques, who was speaking to the performers in Peter's company. Peter came to a stop on stage as he turned towards Jacques and said, "You wanted to see me, Jacques?" Jacques gave Peter a dumbfounded look while his cast began to laugh as they processed Peter's appearance. Peter stuck his hip out to give himself a more feminine silhouette while he waited for a response. Jacques laughed before he said, "I was unaware we were incorporating a drag bit into this performance." "Last I checked, Claire insisted on it," Peter countered. "I didn't insist on anything," Claire replied, befuddled by how she was being drawn into the situation. "Oh, you weren't the one who said if it was so easy, I should try on a pair of pumps?" "Who was it then, dear?" Peter said with a smile as he moved easily towards her with a pronounced wiggle in his steps that made the cast laugh. "I wasn't serious," Claire countered. "Typical woman," Peter replied in a mock dismissive tone. "It's better to be a typical woman than whatever you're supposed to be," Claire retorted with a grin. "You don't know what she is?" another girl asked with a laugh. "No," Claire replied, giving the girl a peeved glare in the process. "She's a ringmaster," the girl responded. "A ringmaster, really?" "Then, she can be the master of ceremonies tonight," Emily interjected with a smile. "A ring mistress is more like it," Claire retorted. "Either way, I think she could take your part, Jacques," Emily added. Peter blushed at the comment before he responded for Jacques, "I wouldn't want to upstage the director." "Why not?" "You pay his salary," Claire responded, prompting Jacques to glare at her. Claire stooped a little, realizing she had overstepped her bounds. Jacques then said, "I would be willing to let it happen though." "I wouldn't," Peter replied, putting any concerns Jacques may have had to rest. "What's with the whip though?" a male performer asked. "It's to keep you damn, dirty animals in line," Peter retorted. The cast laughed a little as he lashed the whip out to his side, barely missing Emily. Emily shot an angry glance at her boss while she struggled not to shout, "Careful with that or you'll have a lawsuit on your hands." Peter nodded, embarrassed by his near-accidental striking of one of his employees. One of the other actors noticed Peter blushing and decided to see if he could deepen the red color of his cheeks by saying, "Don't make Peter stop with the whip, it makes him look like a real dominatrix." "It's hot." Once the cast finished having another laugh at Peter's expense, Jacques told his cast to focus on their lines while he pulled Peter over to the side. Peter listened to his director's concerns about that night's performance. Peter shrugged them off and said, "The show must go on. I've never had to cancel a performance by this troupe since I founded it, and I'm not about to stop now just because you have a problem with something I wrote." Jacques nodded before Peter exited the stage and went down into the seating area to watch the cast practice its performance while the rest of his staff began to set up for the dinner crowd coming to watch that evening's cabaret performance. Peter had one of his employees bring him a gin and tonic as he crossed his stocking-covered legs and watched Jacques direct the cast through its rehearsal. As Peter brushed his hand against his stockings and took a sip of his drink, he thought back to his many times on stage performing in drag over the years. Those memories seemed distant to him, especially as thoughts about his many nights en femme in the building since he bought it entered his mind. Peter's manhood struggled to swell between his cheeks while he thought about the night before. When everyone had gone home, he locked up the building and turned on the stage lights. He came out dressed in a black and red cowgirl outfit with a matching cowboy hat and black leather boots. It was one of the many outfits that were stashed away in storage from the various performances that took place throughout the years. He was sure that he had not failed to wear a single one of his actress's outfits that fit him at least once over the years. The night before had been like many others. The various lines of the character whose dresses he wore ran through his head and came out of his mouth as he sauntered, pranced and danced around the stage in costumes ranging from a glitter-covered stripper to a tutu-sporting ballerina, white-winged angel, she-devil in a red dress, French maid and a Victorian baroness. While he had performed in drag before, it was always done to be obvious. There was never any question that he was a drag queen on stage. In the fantasies he tried to live out on stage in the empty building, however, he played each feminine part straight. It was a dream that he knew that he would never be able to realize, even if he had not retired from performing. The smile on his face from his memories of the night before, as well as the feelings of the feminine comforts surrounding him, left Peter as he heard Nolita sing the new songs he had wrote for her character. The new numbers that they were unveiling that night felt a little flat to Peter. He shook his head as he came to understand Jacques' concerns. As the final rehearsal before showtime continued, Peter sat sipping on his liquor, wondering how he could spice up the numbers in such a short time. Peter racked his brain until he heard a commotion on the stage. Peter's eyes rose to the stage as he saw a group of the performers gathering around a girl on the floor. "That's not part of the show," Peter muttered before he hurried to his heeled feet. Peter rushed towards the stage and realized which girl had gone down. She was holding her ankle, making Peter fear for the worst. "Oh, shit," Peter muttered while some of the performers looked over towards him. Peter shook his head as he saw Nolita's wincing face while she grasped at her ankle. Peter knew that there was no way that she could go on with the show. Peter looked to Jacques and whispered, "Where's her understudy?" "Out with the flu." Peter clenched his eyes before he stared up at the ceiling while the cast helped get Nolita off the floor of the stage. Two men carried her out of the building to bring her to the hospital, leaving Jacques, Peter and the remainder of the cast to try to figure out how to salvage the performance. "Does anyone know Nolita's lines?" Peter inquired. A few hands went up, but Peter realized that each of the performers had at least an equally important role in that night's performance. Emily smiled as she emerged from behind the curtains and said, "Don't you know the lines, Peter?" "Me? Yes, you wrote them, didn't you?" I wrote them for a girl, not for a tranny, Peter retorted before blushing at how he characterized himself in front of his employees. Oh, I don't think you give yourself enough credit. Why not? You could definitely pull off the girl thing, Emily said as the performers laughed, even as some of them did not doubt the accuracy of Emily's words. This could work, Jacques seconded. It's not going to work, Peter rejoined. No. It's great. That duet was falling flat with Nolita singing it. This is what we need to spice it up. What? The absurd. How is it absurd? Peter inquired. We have all these girls who could sing the song and play the part, but we could have a guy playing the part. It's Python-esque. I wrote that song for a strong voice. I can't sing like Nolita. There's a reason I was always a secondary cast member who was only in for comic relief. I'm not a lead. Well, Claire's the lead. Nolita was just part of the supporting cast anyway, and you just said that's your strength as a performer, Emily noted. All right, maybe I could sing it, but what are people going to think? What about? We've had drag performers in the shows for years. When you founded the troupe, you were always in some ridiculous outfit, Jacques countered, remembering the formative years of the troupe when they had both been performers. Peter shook his head. That was a long time ago. Sensibilities have changed, Jacques. These shows are more about burlesque than they used to be. Mindless titillation, that's what the sordid public wants these days. My breasts might entertain the boys, but comedy's still the heart of it, besides the singing, Claire countered. Do you really think I can dance in heels? Peter asked. You said it was easy, and you sure as hell move around in those 4-inch platforms without a problem, Claire answered with a smile. Jacques nodded as he replied, You have years of dance training, Peter. If anyone can pull it off, it would be you. Do you know how long ago that was? Come on, you only stopped performing 6 years ago. Yes, 6 years ago. 6 years ago I was 15 pounds lighter, had more hair on the top of my head and was not paying a mortgage on this building to house the troupe. Come on, Peter, it's your one last chance to be a star, Emily interjected. Peter shook his head with a smile at her. Emily knew just how much Peter wanted to relent, and she was not going to let him get away with not going through with it. Peter shrugged and said, Fine. Let's do this. Jacques clapped and said, Perfect. Places everyone. Peter watched as the cast got back into the positions they had been in before Nolita had fallen while doing a twirl. Peter looked for where Nolita had been standing before he said, I've got to change my shoes. Why? Claire asked with a laugh. Because these shoes aren't made for dancing. And my heels are? Yes, Emily responded for Peter before she went to retrieve a pair of character shoes in his size. Jacques had the cast perform a few scenes before Emily returned with a pair of black character shoes with a buckle strap and a 3-inch heel. Peter thanked her as he rested upon a table and removed his Mary Jane heels. He slipped on the character shoes and felt their cushioned lining and breathable fake leather while he worked his feet into them. Once Peter finished putting on his shoes, they began to practice some of Peter's lines. After reciting the first few, Claire asked, Shouldn't you tailor the lines for a drag queen? Peter shook his head and said, That's up for the audience to make that connection. How could they not? One of the guys asked to the laughter of some of the other performers. You'll find out what I have up my sleeve, Peter retorted. Peter's comment did not make Jacques feel at ease, but he knew that he could not control his boss, so he had to let it slide. Peter went back to going over his lines and speaking in a very high-pitched voice that made Jacques wince. Christ! Was this a terrible idea? Jacques thought before he wondered. Maybe putting Python in his mind was not the best move. Despite the unease of his director and castmates, Peter enjoyed the rehearsal and his exchanges with the performers as they gave each other tips. The interactions between the performers was the thing he missed the most about performing since he began to focus exclusively on writing for, as well as marketing and managing, the Cabaret troupe. Once the rehearsal came to an end, Peter went to grab a quick, light dinner with some of the performers. As they sat down and ate together, they started to make small talk. Claire smiled at Peter as she said, "You know, you really do make dancing in heels sure look easy." "Practice makes perfect," Peter replied, blushing. "How many shows did you do in drag?" Murray, an actor in the troupe, asked. "Too many to recount offhand," Peter answered. The members of the troupe with him snickered before one of the girls asked, "So is this the reason that some of our costumes seem a little stretched out from time to time?" Peter nearly choked as he wondered if the costumes did not fit him as well as he thought they did. Sure, some of them were a little tight, but not enough to be noticeable, Peter thought as his delusions regarding his late-night cross-dressing began to collapse around him. Peter's silence was treated as an admission by the laughing troupe before Murray asked, "How many years has it been since you were out there?" "On stage?" "No, as a cougar on the prowl," Murray retorted. "6 years, smart ass," Peter rejoined while he continued to eat. "I know it's been 6 years. I meant how long since you were out there in heels?" "6 years," Peter repeated. "Were you ever a guy on stage?" Claire inquired. "Of course. I wasn't sure. You seem more comfortable dancing in heels than most of us." "I have more practice." "That seems hard to believe." "It really does," Peter thought before he said, "I guess I'm just a natural then." "Yes, you're a regular Ginger Rogers doing everything Fred did, but backwards and in heels, but you could have just as easily been Fred," Claire remarked. "If you're going to imitate the best, not the second best," Peter countered with a smile. After finishing eating, the group retreated to the dressing room to get ready for the show. Peter broke away from the group, however, and went towards his office to change into a flapper costume that was similar to the one that Nolita had been planning to wear that night. Peter stepped into his office and began to disrobe out of the ringmaster costume he had dressed in as a joke. Peter removed his character's shoes before he stepped out of the black mini skirt, folded it and placed it down on his chair. He placed his jacket over it before he began to remove his top hat and wig. Peter's fingers fiddled with the laces of his corset before he pulled it off his upper body, leaving his body covered in nothing more than his stockings, garters, a gaff and breast forms. Peter shook his head as he turned and looked at the distinctly historically inaccurate costume that Emily had spent a fair amount of time altering to fit him. After pulling the dress over his head, Peter adjusted the fringe-covered straps of the dress over his shoulders before he reached and pulled down at the short hem that barely covered the tops of his stockings. The gray, layered fringe dress had been tapered by Emily to hug his body in a way that flaunted his curves, rather than hide them as a flapper dress was supposed to do. The reasoning behind the historic inaccuracy was clear to Peter since he knew that the straight men in the audience who were dragged in by their wives wanted to see a lady's curves. Even the women and gay men probably wanted it too, Peter figured, knowing how sensibilities had changed. Peter could not resist the urge to look at his reflection in the mirror and stare at how the dress looked on him. What greeted him in the mirror impressed Peter as he smirked at how his fake bust practically spilled out of the dress's sweetheart neckline. "I wonder if they'll be able to tell," Peter thought as he put on his brown-haired, bob wig and secured it to his head. After securing the wig, Peter reached for a sequined, feathered headband. He placed it on his head and affixed it with more pins and wondered aloud, what would the straight guys think if they didn't realize I wasn't a woman when I came out on stage? They'd probably be humping me all night in this dress. Peter laughed at the self-perceived absurdity of the statement before he took hold of a necklace of costume pearls. Peter locked the closure of the necklace behind his neck before he stepped back into his black character shoes and started towards the door. As Peter opened the door to his office, he thought, this could be a long night. After shaking his head, Peter tried to focus on positive thoughts while he went back to the mirror to touch up his makeup and make sure that his wig was firmly attached to his bald cap. That's the last thing I need, Peter thought as images of his wig flying off filled his head while he made his way out of the office. Emily saw Peter emerge from his office and asked, "How do you feel?" Like Louise Brooks with a bigger rack, Peter answered with a forced smile. "No. I mean, really, how are you doing?" Emily responded. "I've been better," Peter admitted. "You're not getting stage fright, are you?" Emily asked with a smile. "I've never gotten it yet." "That's good because you've got nothing to be scared of given how good you look in that dress." "You did a great job." "I did, but it's all about how you wear it." I know, Peter replied, finishing her sentence, as he tilted his head to the side. "Smart girl. You learn quickly, but, just so you know, don't act like you're any smarter than me or you'll be out there in nothing but a banana skirt when you do your costume change. Is that clear, Miss Baker?" "Wouldn't be my first time out there in one," Peter thought with a smile before he replied, "Miss Baker? It's more and more fitting name for a flapper than Peter or Mr. Baker, isn't it?" "I would imagine so," Peter replied before Emily patted him on the shoulder and went back to work on finishing the alterations to his second costume for the performance. As the crowd began to enter the building, Jacques went onto the stage and started to introduce the show. Peter watched from the side as various performers from the troupe began going through brief comedy routines while the patrons gave their orders to his waitresses. Peter felt butterflies in his stomach as the curtain began to come up as the main performance of the night started. Peter could never remember feeling nervous on stage, but after years of not performing, Peter worried that his timing would be rusty. Peter tried not to shake in his character's shoes as his turn to enter the stage came. He walked onto the stage with ease in his heels once his cue came. Feeling more confident the second he reached the stage, he tried to become the female character he had written for Nolita in all ways. Deciding to play the character straight, rather than the way he rehearsed, Peter spoke in the most unisex voice he could muster between puffs on his cigarette holder, surprising the performer playing his male character counterpart. As Peter deadpanned a response to the actor's question, he stared at the audience and wondered if they realized that he was not a woman. Peter struggled to stay in character as he noticed no murmuring in the audience about his voice. "I don't think they know," Peter thought, feeling excited, but knowing that he had to keep his composure. He kept up his act before Claire went to sing a song with one of the male performers while he retreated into the background. Once the song turned into a dance number, Peter struggled to keep up with the other girls' steps. While Peter had helped choreograph the routine and had practiced it from time to time in solitude under the stage lights, staying in unison with the other performers was too difficult for him to do. Jacques winced as he watched Peter fail to dance in complete conformity with the female performers, but he felt that Peter was at least performing serviceably. Peter blushed when he pulled up his skirt and showed his rear to the audience in unison with the other girls. Peter prayed that his gaffe was keeping everything hidden away before the skirt of his dress was let back down as they continued to dance. Despite his troubles, Peter could not help but enjoy his part in the performance as he looked only slightly different from the girls adorned in similar dresses and identical black heels dancing beside him. Claire sensed Peter's enjoyment of his performance and smiled, but she was able to keep her focus on her own performance. The dance number ended and the female performers all pulled off their dresses and twirled them over their heads with the exception of Peter and Claire. Peter, Claire and the men on stage stared at the girls as the topless ladies went through their strutting routines while singing about how bad girls always get the boys. The topless girls soon exited the stage with most of the male performers in tow with their tongues hanging out, leaving only Claire, Peter and the male lead, Murray, on the stage. Murray's character turned towards Peter and Claire and asked, "What's wrong with you girls?" A snicker came up from the crowd before Peter responded in his unisexual tone, "There's nothing wrong with us, we just don't walk the primrose path." There's nothing wrong with letting your hair down and having a good time, ladies. Some girls just have more modesty, Claire's character retorted. Modesty is for nuns. Guys want Pamela Anderson, not Mother Teresa, Murray replied. Guys want hepatitis? Peter's character rejoined. Murray shook his head as he replied in character, "Girls got to shake it off and take it off." Peter and Claire feigned horrified responses before Murray waved his hands at them and scurried off the stage in the direction where the rest of the cast had exited, leaving the stage to Claire and Peter. Claire smiled as the music started and she began to sing her part of the duet she had practiced with Nelita. Peter grinned as he opened his mouth and bellowed his lyrics about the perils of being a good girl in the deepest baritone he could muster. As his singing stopped, Peter stared into the audience and saw the looks of shock on the patrons' faces. Peter smiled, realizing he had fooled them. Shades of Elton's old boy, Peter thought, complimenting himself while Claire went back to singing. Peter then sang his next part, trying his best to emulate Paul Robeson. Oh, what boy wants a sweetheart when he can have a girl who spreads her legs apart? How can I preserve my honor when he can get on her? It's a sin of this day we're in, that the baddest girl always wins. He almost failed to complete his part, as he saw how much Claire was struggling not to laugh. Once Claire began signing her part, he glanced towards the side of the stage and saw the rest of his troupe laughing at him and the audience's response to his reveal. As the song came to an end, Peter heard a cheer go up from the audience. Peter struggled to keep his composure, as he could not recall ever receiving such an ovation when he performed as a man on stage. Other characters then rushed onto the stage, as Peter hurried off. Emily smiled as he came towards her before she said, "You looked good out there." "Thanks. That dance was very seductive. I bet everyone was wondering what was going through your head when you hiked up the skirt of that dress just like the other girls. The show's not over, there will be plenty more for them to think about," Peter reminded her with a wink. "Yes, but we know who the star is now." Peter shook his head as he saw Claire and the others performing on the stage. He smiled as he pointed at Claire and responded, "That's our star. She's got the voice, but you've got the presence with that little stunt with your voice. It's all about shocking the audience. I'm sure they're going to like what comes next," Emily noted as she pulled Peter towards the dressing area. Peter hastily changed into the outfit that Emily had altered for him for the next scene before Claire exited the stage. Peter was familiar with the outfit since he had made recommendations regarding how to design it, as well as the one that Claire was going to be wearing for the final scenes. Peter stripped out of his fringed dress and changed into a corset that he covered with a black and silver flapper dress with a low V neckline, crisscrossing black straps, a silver sequined bodice and long, black and white fringe. Peter smiled at the way the very short dress made his false breasts appear even larger while Claire dressed in a similar red and black dress. Peter touched up the makeup on the seams of his faux bust before applying another layer of lipstick. He smacked his lips together and pursed them as he looked in the mirror. Too bad they already know the truth, Peter thought as he admired his reflection, sure that he could have kept up the ruse he had perpetrated earlier if his voice had not deliberately given him away. Peter heard a group of characters doing a comedy skit skewering the leads, as well as several political and pop culture figures, before he entered the stage beside Claire in their new outfits. The characters scattered as Peter and Claire began to sing another duet. The surprise of the reveal was gone this time, and the performance was less well received until Claire pulled off her dress to reveal her fishnets and black corset. Not to be outdone, Peter sang, "You may think you know what's in its heart, you may have a head start, but you need to know that two can put on a show." The crowd cheered as Peter then stripped off his dress and showed the matching white corset that he was wearing. In character, Claire shook her head, while Peter realized that the crowd was finding it much more entertaining seeing a guy in drag try to one-up Claire than another woman. Jacques was so right, Peter thought as Claire went back to singing, "Why have chicken when you can have steak? Why would he settle for okay when he can have great?" Peter retorted in song, "You think he wants you when he can have all of this? Trust me, bitch, mine will be the only lips he'll kiss. I've got the hips. I'll part my lips. I've got the rack," Claire sang, pressing her breasts together. "Bitch, I'm also stacked," Peter bellowed to the audience's general approval. "I know how to suck his dick. You can only fit the tip. Give it up, the boy is mine. But he's getting a piece of my behind," Peter sang in response, thankful that his parents were not alive to see his performance proclaiming his love for a boy and what he would do to him as a bad girl. "I'll let him fuck my tits. I'll play with his bits." Claire finished the song before the lead male character entered the stage. Once Claire ripped off the top to her outfit, the men in the audience cheered as she began to sing with the man. Peter's character interjected, but was rebuffed as scripted. "It would have been funnier if I won," Peter thought as he sulked before wondering about how to rewrite the ending as the curtain came down. Peter then scurried with the cast to get into place as the curtain came up and the cast came out to take a bow. As the cheering that had once been familiar filled his ears for the other cast members, Peter zoned out until his own name was called. Peter took a bow to a loud ovation from the crowd that brought a smile to his face as he thought, "I might have to make a habit out of this."